I want you to think about the last time you overreacted. Not a little frustrated. Not mildly annoyed. I mean, the time you went way past what the situation actually called for. The argument that escalated into something that didn't make sense. The moment of grief that hit 10 times harder than it should have. The rage that came from nowhere, or the shutdown that came from everywhere at once. And afterward, maybe an hour later, maybe the next morning, you sat with it. And you thought, where did that even come from? Here's the answer nobody gave you. It didn't come from you. Not originally. It came from someone who is probably no longer in the room. Someone who maybe isn't even alive anymore. Someone who swallowed something years, maybe decades before you were born, and never processed it. Never healed it. Never even named it. And silently, completely, without a single word being spoken, they handed it to you. And you have been carrying it ever since. Calling it yours. This is the psychology of emotional inheritance. And once you understand it, truly understand it, not just intellectually, but in your bones, you will never look at your emotional life the same way again. Let's start with the science. Because this is not metaphor. This is not poetry. This is biology. In 2013, researchers at Emory University conducted a study that quietly rewrote everything we thought we knew about how trauma works. They took mice. They exposed them to the smell of cherry blossoms and simultaneously gave them an electric shock. Classic fear conditioning. The mice learned to fear that smell. Then those mice had offspring. And here's where it gets haunting. The offspring, who had never smelled cherry blossoms, who had never been shocked, who had no conscious memory of any trauma, they feared that smell too. Their brains had physically developed more smell receptors for that specific scent. Their nervous systems were pre-wired to respond to a threat they had never personally encountered. And then their offspring, the third generation, showed the same response. A fear, passed down, encoded not in memory, but in biology. This is called epigenetic inheritance. And what it means, in plain language, is this. The experiences of your parents, your grandparents, possibly your great-grandparents. They didn't just shape their lives. They shaped the physical structure of your nervous system, your stress response, your emotional baseline, your capacity for trust, for intimacy, for resilience. Before you took your first breath, your emotional architecture was already under construction, and it was being built from their blueprints. Now, sit with that for a second, because most of us walk around thinking our emotional life is ours. Our anxiety, ours. Our difficulty trusting people, ours. Our tendency to go cold under pressure, or to spiral under uncertainty, or to need constant reassurance, ours. But what if most of it isn't? What if most of what you call your emotional personality is actually a biological transmission from people who were doing the best? What if most of what you call your emotional personality is actually a biological transmission from people who were doing the best they could in circumstances you never lived through, processing pain they never had the tools to process? Carl Jung said a lot of things that made people uncomfortable. But there is one idea, one specific idea, that I think is the most confrontational thing he ever wrote. He said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." Read that again, slowly. Not the cruelty, not the abuse, not the neglect, although those matter enormously. The unlived life, the dreams they abandoned, the authentic self they buried to be acceptable, to be safe, to be loved, the emotions they were never allowed to feel, the ambitions they killed before anyone else could kill them first, the grief they swallowed, the rage they converted into silence, the love they never learned how to give because no one ever gave it to them correctly. All of that unlived material, it doesn't disappear. The psyche doesn't just let it go. It metabolizes it, converts it, and passes it forward. Not through explicit teaching, not through conversations at the dinner table, through something far more insidious, through transmission. The way your mother's body tensed when the subject of money came up. You felt that. You didn't have language for it, but your nervous system recorded it and concluded, money means danger. Money means tension. Money means something is about to go wrong. The way your father went quiet, not peaceful quiet, but the specific dense, pressurized quiet of a man swallowing something when his authority was questioned. You felt that too, and concluded, conflict means someone disappears. Disagreement means the relationship is at risk. The way love in your home was always conditional, always tied to performance, always slightly withheld as a form of control. Your body learned that. And now, as an adult, when someone loves you freely, without condition, without agenda, it feels wrong. It feels suspicious. It feels like a trap. You didn't learn these things. You absorbed them, and now they run in you like firmware. Now let's get specific, because emotional inheritance doesn't look the same in everyone. It shows up in 3 primary ways, and chances are you will recognize yourself in at least one of them. The first is emotional replication. This is the most obvious form. You swore you'd never be like your father, and one day you hear his words coming out of your mouth. You promised yourself you'd never repeat your mother's anxiety, and you catch yourself checking the locks 3 times before bed. The patterns you witnessed most intensely in childhood become grooves in your behavior, not because you admire them, not because you chose them, but because the brain learns what it sees repeatedly. Repetition equals normal. Normal equals safe. And the unconscious mind will always move toward what feels familiar, even when that familiarity is painful. The second is emotional compensation. This is less obvious and arguably more destructive. This is when you saw something in your parents that you decided, consciously or not, to become the opposite of. Your father was controlling, so you became pathologically passive, unable to express needs, unable to assert yourself, calling it easygoing when it is actually self-erasure. Your mother was emotionally volatile, so you became emotionally sealed, calling it stoicism when it is actually the carefully maintained absence of feeling. You overcorrected, and the overcorrection is just as inherited as the original wound, just wearing different clothes. The third is emotional carrying. This is the deepest, most invisible form. This is when you are carrying emotions that were never yours to begin with. The grief that lives in you that has no clear source. The shame that surfaces around specific topics, money, sexuality, ambition, desire, that feels ancient, bone deep, almost ancestral. The rage that comes when certain dynamics play out, unfairness, powerlessness, being unseen, that feels like it contains more history than your own life could possibly account for. This is intergenerational transmission at its most profound. You are not experiencing these emotions. You are processing them on behalf of people who couldn't. You are completing emotional cycles that were open before you were born. And until you recognize them as inherited, as not originally yours, you will spend your entire life trying to heal from wounds you never received directly, trying to understand feelings that have no origin point in your personal history, trying to fix a pain that is not structured like a personal injury, because it isn't one. Here is where it gets truly invisible, and this is the part that I think is the most important. We can identify the dramatic inheritances, the trauma, the addiction, the rage, the collapse. Those are visible. Those have names. But the most pervasive emotional inheritance is not dramatic at all. It's atmospheric. It's the general emotional climate of the home you grew up in. Not the events, the air. The baseline emotional temperature that was just there. That no one named. That no one acknowledged as anything other than reality. Some homes have an unspoken current of anxiety running through everything. Not crisis anxiety, just a low hum. A sense that things could go wrong. That safety is provisional. That good things don't last. Nobody said this out loud. It was just the water you swam in. Some homes have an unspoken rule about joy. That it should be small. That expressing too much happiness is tempting fate. That wanting too much leads to disappointment. So better to want less and be safely unhappy than to want fully and risk devastation. Some homes have an unspoken current of shame. About the family's history. About social status. About bodies or desire or ambition. An ambient low-grade shame that clings to everything like smoke. And you don't even realize you're breathing it in until you're out of the house and find yourself carrying it into every room you enter. You didn't inherit a specific event. You inherited a frequency, a vibrational baseline. And your nervous system has been tuned to that frequency since before you could speak. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. Breaking emotional inheritance is not a weekend project. It is not a realization that fixes things. It is not even a single course of therapy, though therapy helps enormously. It is a practice, a long, patient, sometimes brutal practice of becoming conscious of what has been unconscious, of naming what was atmospheric, of distinguishing what is yours from what you received. But here is what actually creates the shift. The first step is recognition without blame. Not, my parents ruined me. That is another loop. Another inheritance. The story of victimhood, which is its own trap. But I can see, clearly and without judgment, that certain things were passed to me. Certain emotional patterns, certain nervous system responses, certain beliefs about what is safe and what is possible. They arrived before I had any say in the matter. Recognition without blame means holding two things simultaneously. This was not my fault, and this is now my responsibility. Both at the same time. The second step is grieving what was never given. This is the step most people skip, because it requires you to admit what you needed and didn't receive. And admitting that, truly admitting it, not intellectually but emotionally, is extraordinarily painful. The child who needed safety and received chaos. The child who needed unconditional love and received conditional approval. The child who needed to be truly seen and was instead molded, managed, and directed into shape. Grieving, this is not wallowing. Grieving, this is the necessary acknowledgement of a real loss. And ungrieved losses don't disappear. They calcify. They become the invisible weight you carry into every relationship, every opportunity, every moment that asks you to trust. The third step is differentiation. This is the Jungian work, looking at every significant emotional pattern in your life and asking with genuine curiosity, not self-judgment, where did this come from? Not to excuse it, not to blame someone else for it, but to locate its origin so you can finally see it as a pattern you have, not a truth you are. Because here is the fundamental shift. A wound that has no name has total power over you. You live inside it. You see reality through it. Every situation gets filtered through its lens, and the filter is invisible to you because you have never seen anything without it. But a wound that has a name, a wound that you can look at and say, I know where you came from. I know whose story you belong to. I know what you were trying to protect. That wound no longer has the same power. It is no longer the lens. It becomes something you can hold, something you can work with. something you can, slowly, imperfectly, with enormous compassion for yourself, put down. So here is where we land. And I want you to actually sit with this. Don't scroll. Don't move. Just sit. You are not just yourself. You are the accumulation of every person in your lineage who loved fully and was never told how, who raged and never understood why, who achieved and still felt empty, who was broken by systems they didn't create and couldn't escape, who swallowed something enormous and alive and unprocessed, and passed it forward because they didn't know what else to do with it. You carry them, all of them, in your body, in your nervous system, in the way you respond to rejection, to love, to failure, to intimacy. And that is not a life sentence. It is an invitation to become the first person in your line to look at what was passed to you, clearly, honestly, without flinching, and to make a conscious choice about what you carry forward, what you transform, what you refuse to transmit to the people who come after you. Because somewhere downstream, in your children, in the people you love, in the version of you that could exist on the other side of this work, someone is waiting to receive something different, waiting to inherit something lighter. Not the wound, not the loop, not the silence and the shame and the swallowed grief, but something that might, for the first time in your family's history, actually deserve to be called free. Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But maybe, the privilege of a generation is something even harder than that. To become who your family never got to be. To live the life that was unlived before you. To break the chain, not with anger, not with blame, but with the quiet, devastating, revolutionary act of waking up. You didn't choose what you inherited, but you are the first person in your line right now, in this moment, who knows it's there. And knowing it's there means you can finally decide what to do with it.